Hi, Misha here, and I already did a little series on the MiGs from the 15 through the 29, and in that I said I would get to the Sukhoi, and there's a bunch of them, but today we're going to look at 4, and this will actually be a 2-part video. In the second part, we'll look at the SU-25 and the SU-34, which are actually the armored strike and ground support, close support members in the family. But today, we're going to look at the original SU-27. This is an early variant model, circa 1987. And then look at a much more modern member of the family, the SU-35. This is circa 2013. Both of these models are 1/72 scale diecast from Hobby Master, and a couple of you have asked me about where to buy these, or suggestions and whatnot. And I actually worked out a little something. I've been really happy with a business known as Pete's Collectibles out of Houston, Texas. Now, I have bought a few from other places, but he's just always seemed like he's had the most in stock for the best price, and is just a friendly person willing to kind of work with me and look over the models, kind of describe, provide a little extra service since I can't see them myself. To that end, anyway, he has made a promo code, if anyone's interested, on his website. It allows 15% off any, normal orders, and free shipping over $100 or $5 shipping under $100. So you can get a model for, $5 shipped. And the promo code is really complicated. It is Misha. M-I-S-H-A. So, yeah. I'm not really getting any kind of kickback from it or anything. It's just he's been very helpful to me, kind of going above and beyond. And I thought, hey, if I can help out some, and if anyone's actually serious about getting into these, save you some money, and I'll just be happy to be the middleman and be of some service. And if not, I hope you just enjoy this video. So let's get into it. The SU-27, the flanker, and there's a few different. They go through A, B, C, D, even into E's and whatnot, because essentially once Sukhoi kind of hit on this design, they stuck with it. And now, if you watch my video on the MiG 29, I mentioned the 1969, the Soviet military high command wanted to have basically a do-everything fighter. It needed to be capable of long range, taking off and landing on pretty short, primitive runways, able to do interception and ground attack, good altitude and all that. Well, they realized this wasn't really going to happen all in one fighter. So by 71, they split the program into two. A light tactical fighter, which became the MiG-29, and a heavy long range, more of a strategic fighter. And this ended up with Sukhoi. Work would begin, and by 1974 they were well underway, and the first prototypes flew under the T-10 designation in 1977. While they showed promise, it actually took until 1985 for this to go into, for the first aircraft to really be delivered to the military, and this wasn't really officially declared in full service until 1990. The problem was this. Unfortunately, the program was plagued with setbacks and a few tragedies. For example, in 1978, the second prototype crashed, and then in 81, 82, at least 2 more prototypes crashed. It was a very advanced, very heavy, very ambitious plane. Fast and high performance. And they had a lot of troubles getting the engines right, amongst other things. But it did eventually go into service, and is still in service today. It's a big plane. It is 72 feet long, and it's a bit over 48 feet wide. It has a total of 10 external hardpoints for missiles, bombs, rockets, what have you. It also has one 30mm cannon with 150 rounds, crew of 1. It's capable of Mach 1.3 at sea level, and it can exceed Mach 2.3 at altitude. And it's capable of getting up to at least 62,000 feet. Has a very long range of over 2,000 miles. And originally, the SU-27, codename Flanker, was made in Soviet Russia as an interceptor. They were worried about the new B-1B, as well as the older but still lethal B-52 bomber. So it was designed to be a patrol and interceptor if those ever crossed the border. Also, it had a secondary role as a bomber escort if Russian bombers were ever called upon. But the point to take away was originally this was mostly an air-to-air dogfighter. It was meant to go up against planes such as the F-14 Tomcat, F-15, and later the F-16. That's why an early version like this is primarily armed with air-to-air missiles. Even though it took quite a while to get this plane going, once it did, it was quite successful. Production is still ongoing today. And once it did enter service in 1990, it became quite effective and popular in Russia. Of course, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, so this would end up in service more to Russia than it ever was the Soviets. But this did see use towards the end in the Afghanistan war, during the Soviet invasion and occupation of that nation. This model here is kind of in that very 80s Russian camo scheme. They have produced over 800 SU-27s, and they've been used by multiple nations, although primarily this is still a Russian heavy long-range fighter. Of course, over time it has been upgraded, and many variants have come out. For example, there was the SU-27K, which was made for naval operations in the late 80s. Russia was really wanting to have its own aircraft carriers, even though they would be considered more like escort carriers. Still, There was the SU-30, which was kind of a customized version meant mostly for export customers. And you had the SU-27M, which was a dedicated multirole version. Like I said, this was originally an air superiority fighter, although it could serve in other capacities if needed. But that's not really what it was originally built for. But the SU-27M would attempt to correct that. And that's really where the story, if I can ever find where it's at in my hand. There it is. Of the SU-35 begins. So let's get on to that. The SU-35, also known as the Flanker E, is one of the newest aircraft in the Russian Air Force. And while it is definitively more modern than the SU-27, it's almost a stopgap measure until the new SU-57 is ready. At least that's what they say. But let's backtrack. After the SU-27 was in production and starting to see use, the SU-27M multi-role variant became a priority, and essentially they were working with it so it could be a better ground attack and all-around aircraft. It had an improved radar. They experimented with canards, which had been used on the SU-27K. This was to get better lift so it can carry more. And just, this and that and other things else. Working more and more with laser guided ordnance and so on and so forth. The prototype SU-27M flew in 1988, but then the next year, because of various budget cutbacks and political considerations, essentially the project was mostly just shelved, at least for a time. Sukhoi would make about 14 prototypes to show off at various air shows and military exposés in the 1990s. And then, in 2003, they would really come back to the design and update it and redesignate it the SU-35. Now, yes, they made changes, but this was also a bit of marketing to make it seem new and fresh, because they were targeting export customers. At that time, they were financially in pretty bad shape, as were many Russian factories and companies. And this is basically just an SU-27. It has a further updated radar. It has more modern weapons systems, a more modern, up-to-date cockpit with instrumentation. Has a more versatile ordnance. It has a total of 12 hard points under the wing and fuselage. One thing that it does have that's unique is it has thrust vectoring, meaning that the engine nozzles can pivot to help with maneuverability and agility. This was actually something that at least one of the SU-27M prototypes had, but it became standard with the SU-35. Spec-wise, we're almost the same We're just a little bit longer, just by a little bit. At just under 73 foot. We have a slightly wider wingspan to accommodate it's about 50 feet now. Because of the thrust vectoring, we didn't have to do the canards. They also took the opportunity, this is not a stealth plane, but they did what they could to minimize its signature, working with the intakes and the jet output. Again, trying to make it a modern fighter. It's still defined as a 4th generation because it is at its heart still an SU-27, but with a pretty radical facelift. The first prototype of this new generation would fly in 2008. And interestingly, even though it was designed for export, in 2009, the Russian Air Force placed the first order. They wanted 48 planes. And Sukhoi had, well, they didn't, but the factory had the first plane about ready to go by 2010, and it was delivered 2011. And by 2012, the Russians were testing a few of these, putting them through their paces, correcting issues. 2014, this was officially adopted, introduced into service. And by 2015, the original order for 48 was complete, and by this point, it had been upped to 100. And in 2016, the first SU-35s in the Russian military were sent to Syria, where they saw their first real combat. This one here is in the modern Russian camo scheme that they went to in recent years. Still has kind of the mint bottom, but more of a gray top. These have also been purchased in smaller numbers by China and Indonesia. So they found some success. And since they're just now being really made operational by 2018 and really considered fully mature, it's very, very likely these will be in Russian frontline service for a long time to come, even if the SU-57 materializes, which is supposedly their new 5th generation fighter. And so there you go. You've got the flanker over there, an early one from 87, and you've got the flanker E, or as it's sometimes referred to as the super flanker, from current Russian operations. These models from Hobby Master are quite heavy in metal. It may be perception, but the older one feels a little heavier to me, but I couldn't really tell you why. They both seem to have the same amount of metal. The wings are metal. The fins and stuff are plastic, which is pretty common for these things. Let me see if this one's also plastic. Yeah, I think so. Like I said, I don't know why, it's probably just perception, but this one feels a tiny bit lighter. But both are very large craft. They're about 1 foot long each. And again, the 35 here is kind of set up as more of a multi-role. It has both bombs and missiles. These also still retain the 30mm cannon, by the way. Whereas the 27 is set up as more of a air superiority. It's kind of different. And of course you can display them with landing gear up or down, ordnance on or off. And with the 35 you can adjust the nozzles. It comes with a total of 3 sets of nozzles, so you can aim them as you wish. Pretty neat. But yeah, part 1 looking at the Sukhois. Next we'll get to the 25 and the 34. Any questions or comments? I welcome them below. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And again, if you like to grab 1 or 2 of these for yourself, try using Misha as a promo code over at Pete's Collectibles. Not something I normally do, but figured I'd see if that helped anyone out. Give it a trial run. But these have been a lot of fun for me, so yeah. If you haven't, you might check out the videos I've done on the MiGs. And as time goes on, I'll try to do other ones. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.